be the one to witness the birth of the incredible Nintendo Entertainment System? The one to play with Rob, the extraordinary video robot, batteries not included.
Video games have come a long way. You only need to look at whatever game you grew up with compared to what's available now to see that. Yet for some reason we still hold on to the classics regardless of the aging process. And why do we do this? Is it purely nostalgia? Well, yes, more often than not, this is most definitely the case. I can think of plenty of games I enjoyed growing up, however, when I try them today, 30 years later, I need to re-educate myself on how to get around the handicaps that newer games have long overcome. But what about the games that don't age? What about those games that don't need to push the limits on whatever system they were on? The games that were simply just solid experiences that worked with what they had and are still just as enjoyable today as they have always been. I'm sure that when you read this you're already thinking of that perfect title that did everything it needed to, and to this very day it still provides an experience that no other game, old or new, could possibly beat. And this is the story of two guys who shared this passion for a single 8-bit title from 1991 on the NES and continued to do so for the next 30 plus years. That game was Tecmo Super Bowl.
Play Tecmo Metal version.
Tecmo Super Bowl is an American football game by Tecmo. Obviously, released originally in 1987 worldwide under the name Tecmo Bowl, the original arcade unit was a lot wider than standard cabinets for the time, making use of two screens which allowed the player to see a lot more of the top-down playing field. You pick your fictional team, be it the Wildcats or Bulldogs, and enjoy a very well-respected American football game, if that's your thing. The sprites are nice and fat, the large screen area lets you plan out your moveset better than most games in the same genre, and besides the game being a tad too slow for my liking, it's still a fun experience and is obviously best enjoyed whilst drinking Kool-Aid, probably in a frat house with one of those unwashed oversized football jerseys on. I don't know. Regardless, none of this really matters. This is just the history of the franchise. If you've played Tecmo Bowl before, it's unlikely that this would have been the version that you played, because it was when the game made its way onto the NES in 1989 and more importantly Super Tecmo Bowl in 1991 when the series really did find its hardcore audience. Not here in the UK of course, as it was never released physically, but instead in the States. Yet whilst we were playing titles such as Kickoff and eventually the almighty Sensible Soccer, the Yanks were more than a little obsessed with Tecmo Super Bowl, so much so that it ended up finding its way onto the NES Mini, for us too for some weird reason. Anyway, Josh Marchant and Dave Pilkington were two young lads that did live in America. Both had the NES, no surprise there. They didn't know of each other's existence, but they both shared a keen interest in Tecmo Super Bowl. Fast forward from the early 90s to 2013, and Josh, who was now a big boy nerd, was holding his third annual Tecmo Super Bowl Championship, which was when, you guessed it, he met Dave, and instantly the two became joined at the controller cord due to their loving passion for pixelated football scrums. That's an American football thing, right? Anyway, as time moved on over the next 3 years and no doubt thousands of competitive matches on their favourite game later, the duo decided to create a game that was inspired by, you guessed it, Tecmo Super Bowl. The only problem was, how do you beat the perfect American football title? The answer was to use it as inspiration and create the perfect basketball game instead, a sport that the two were much bigger fans of. And that game was Basketball Classics, the game we're going to be looking at today. Basketball Classics is a 5-on-5 basketball game that didn't take inspiration from basketball games that we grew up with, such as NBA Jam, but instead from arguably the most popular American football game released during the 8-bit era instead. This new approach gives the game not only a different feel, but more importantly, a different look. The sprites of each character in Tecmo Super Bowl are 16 pixels high, and they recreated that in this game by creating the characters to be 16 and 18 pixels depending on the position that they play in. Again, just like Tecmo Super Bowl, the playfield is more top-down from what you may be more familiar with, helping create a basketball game that feels a lot more tactile than others that came before it. It's still fast and arcadey as it should be, but by minimizing the size of the player and spacing out the playfield, you are given the ability to work on formation, something that's essential for American footy titles, but often overlooked in early basketball games. Each character has different stats that change up the way that they play, and just like the original Tecmo Bowl, which was the first ever American football game to feature real players' names, this game also features real characters from current and previous teams for you to battle against. Well, actually, with that said, they obviously didn't go out there and spend the stupid amount of money needed to get those real names in, but it's pretty obvious what teams and players you're playing as if you're a hardcore fan enough to work it out. To add a little flair in an otherwise very basic looking pixelated game, short animations play when scoring 3 points, dunks and other exciting shots just like they did in the NES title all of those years ago. This feature was pushed even further when the duo created a crude video message with Japanese subtitles and actually sent it off with a demo of their new in development game to their heroes, the creators of Tecmo Super Bowl, Shimichiro Tomiya and Akihiko Shimoji.
Konnichiwa. Hello, Mr. Akihiko Shimoji. My name's Dave.
And I'm Josh.
And we are your biggest fans.
For the past 2 years, we've been working on our game, Basketball Classics, which we patterned after your masterpiece, Tecmo Super Bowl, which we believe is the greatest sports game of all time.
But after reading about you online, we are humbled by your modesty. We feel like you are a rock star genius and one of the founding fathers of video games.
And today we're here to ask for your help.
Mr. Dave, Mr. Josh, thank you for contacting me, and thank you for playing Tecmo Super Bowl for many years. I saw the video, I am very happy. I also saw a video of Basketball Classics. I feel the atmosphere of Tecmo Super Bowl, it seems very interesting. He then went on to explain a little bit more about the development of Tecmo Super Bowl. We focused on the sensation of the game, everything followed a rhythm, and we had to be willing to cut anything that disrupted that rhythm. What he was referring to was Basketball Classics' dunk system, which at the time was basically a sort of button mashing minigame as you went in for the dunk. What he suggested was to add a bit more variety to these dunk and block scenes, which is what the team at Namogamo did straight away. And this rhythm was implemented into the final release of the title, primarily, as stated, into that dunking system found within those artistic cutscenes that you see in the game. It continued to help with its overall arcadey aesthetic. Sometimes if you're going to be going in for that dunk, you can use the D-pad to recreate different types of dunks, and of course if you're blocking you need to try your best to match these movements before the player reaches the net, and you've only got a limited moveset to do so. This new version was then sent back to Shimoji-san, and he simply replied that I feel that it is getting even better than before. The final end result is simply a great fun, similar to what you've played in the past, but different enough to make it stand out as an indie sports title that doesn't seem to be getting that much attention, sadly. The reviews are very positive over on Steam, and the duo seem to be constantly adding new movesets, among other things, based on player feedback, primarily in their awesome Discord. Go and check that out too. And, well, if classic basketball games and even American football games like Tecmo Super Bowl are up your street, then I highly suggest checking this game out. I'm sure that we can all agree that a classic arcade basketball game with friends is hard to beat. Classic football games for me personally, well, honestly, I can take them or leave them. But a good one-on-one basketball game is always great fun, and thankfully the team at Namogamo Games have created something that quite literally couldn't have been made without the hardcore passion of that video game that they've both admired from such an early age. An American football NES game that turned into an underrated indie basketball game, with an awesome story mode I might add. See you later.
With the utmost regard, we thank you.